This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Celia Hatton, and it's 1600 GMT on Monday, the 2nd of March. These are our main stories. The US-Israel war with Iran enters its third day. The conflict is broadening, with Israel striking the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah in Lebanon. The U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the U.S. is carrying out a devastating mission with U.S. forces trying to destroy Iran's security infrastructure. Iranian officials remain defiant. The head of the country's Supreme National Security Council said Iran would fiercely defend itself and make its enemies sorry for what he called their miscalculation. Also in this podcast, explosions have been heard in capital cities across the region, including Abu Dhabi, Kuwait City, and in Doha, as Iran retaliates.
We do hear regularly explosions in the air as the Qataris intercept missiles and drones. There's been some damage and several injuries as a result of falling debris.
And inside Iran, the Red Cross says 555 people have been killed in the attacks. We've been receiving messages from those on the ground.
People feel anxious and elated all at once. With every explosion, some shout with joy from their windows.
We're devoting all of this edition to the US-Israel war with Iran. Day 3 now, and the conflict has been broadening, affecting a whole list of countries in the region. And inside Iran, the aerial assaults are continuing. A short while ago, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, gave a news conference at the Pentagon. Mr. Hegseth says the U.S. is carrying out what he described as a devastating mission.
This is not Iraq. This is not endless. I was there for both. Our generation knows better, and so does this president. He called the last 20 years of nation-building wars dumb, and he's right. This is the opposite. This operation is a clear, devastating, decisive mission. Destroy the missile threat, destroy the Navy, no nukes. Israel has clear missions as well, for which we are grateful. Unlike so many of our traditional allies who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force, America, regardless of what so-called international institutions say, is unleashing the most lethal and precise air power campaign in history. All on our terms, with maximum authorities. No stupid rules of engagement, no nation-building quagmire, no democracy-building exercise, no politically correct wars.
Well, our North America correspondent is Helena Humphrey. She gave us this assessment of what Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane had to say.
This press briefing was a really key moment because this was the first time that we're hearing from the Trump administration in a live setting in over 48 hours, that chance for reporters to ask questions, including about the military strategy in all of this. I think the tone from the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, was one of absolute resolve, determination from the Trump administration. He had said that we are hitting Iran unapologetically. We also heard from General Kane, as you were saying there, standing shoulder to shoulder, saying that we have hit 1,000 targets. And he said that in doing so, US forces have been able to achieve air superiority over Iran. Now, I was mentioning some of those questions that reporters have had over the weekend since these strikes were launched, including the length and breadth of this conflict. President Trump had been calling members of the media, and he had been sort of saying this could take 4 to 5 weeks. We did then hear the Defense Secretary Hegseth saying that actually when it comes to the timeline, it could move up, it could move down. It's up to President Trump. He has said that he has all of the latitude. And he said to the media who are screaming, could this be an endless war? He said this is not Iraq, and that the administration says that they are finishing the job.
No real clarity on timelines. Are we any clearer on what the goal of this war is and what the US wants to achieve?
Well, I think you're right to ask that question because over the weekend, again, we've had kind of oscillating aims stated. We heard from Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defence, once again on that point saying, quote, "This is not a regime change war." He had said instead that, this is also about disabling missiles, a threat through proxies across the region. And he was repeating that line that we'd heard from President Trump over the weekend, calling on the Iranian people to rise up. Now, of course, many military analysts will point out that it is difficult to see regime change when you just have aerial support with an air campaign. In terms of a justification for this conflict, Pete Hegseth said that they had tried to lie their way to a nuclear bomb. And essentially, the argument from the administration is that Iran was not negotiating in good faith on a nuclear deal following Operation Midnight Hammer and those strikes in June of last year.
Helena Humphrey speaking to Regina Vaidyanathan. To Lebanon now, which is being pulled into the Iran conflict. Overnight, the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah, which is based in Lebanon, fired missiles into Israel towards the Israeli city of Haifa. The group said this was to avenge the killing of Iran's supreme leader. And Israel responded, launching strikes on Hezbollah targets across the country. Since the early hours of the morning, explosions have been rocking the capital, Beirut, and thousands of people have fled their homes. The Israel Defense Forces released a statement saying that Hussein Makhlad, the head of Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters, was killed in Sunday's strike. Nadav Shoshani is a spokesman from the Israel Defense Forces.
Overnight, the IDF carried out retaliatory strikes against several Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, including command and control centers, launch sites, and senior terrorists. We were ready for this. As part of the preparations for our operation in Iran, the IDF prepared for an attack from Hezbollah, allowing us to carry out a swift response. Hezbollah is entering a fight it cannot win.
Lebanon's health ministry reported that at least 31 people have been killed. The country's prime minister has announced that the government banned Hezbollah's armed activities, marking one of the clearest challenges to the group's authority. Our correspondent Lina Sinjab gave us this update from Beirut about the Israeli strikes.
It was immediately after Hezbollah launched an attack into Israel in retaliation, they say, for the killing of the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei. Israel launched its strikes, here in the southern suburb of Beirut, in the south of Lebanon, and in the Bekaa Valley. And just like an hour ago or so, there were more strikes in Baalbek and also in the south of Lebanon, and here also in the suburb. And as I'm talking to you, probably you can hear in the background the sound of the drones. That is coming back as well by Israeli drones, surveying over the sky of Lebanon and over Beirut. And this is all of a reminder of, a 3-month-long war that took place 18 months ago, where Israel, assassinated the top leadership of Hezbollah, crippled its power, and, left many of their strongholds in destruction. And what we're seeing today is just a deja vu of a war that happened. Families are fleeing again. The streets of Beirut are filled with cars for families trying to find shelter. No one wanted to live this war again. They have warned Hezbollah not to get involved, but they took the decision, and many Lebanese, they feel that Hezbollah is acting as a proxy to Iran rather than defending national interest. That's what led the government today to announce just a short while ago that they are banning any Hezbollah activity, any military activity by Hezbollah, and that Hezbollah should be restricted to its political role, and that the army is instructed now to implement all the details of handing over military power of Hezbollah to be solely in the hands of the official army.
Lina Sinjab. In the last hour, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut has called on its citizens to not travel to Lebanon and has also urged those already in the country to depart now while commercial flight options remain available. Many in Lebanon feel that Hezbollah, funded by Tehran, has prioritized Iranian interests over those of Lebanon's own people. So let's talk more about the political reaction to what's going on there. Ghassan Hasbani is Lebanon's former deputy prime minister and is a sitting MP for the Lebanese Forces Party, the largest political grouping in parliament.
It's exactly what we've been warning against for a long time, that Hezbollah is acting outside the control of the Lebanese government, basically bringing Lebanon into a regional conflict that has nothing to do with Lebanon specifically, and still proving day after day that they are directly linked and controlled by the Iranian current regime. Our biggest concern is that Lebanon, in its majority, rejects the acts of Hezbollah, and the government of Lebanon has taken a clear decision to curb the activities of Hezbollah and dismantle the military infrastructure of Hezbollah in Lebanon. This has been a slow process, which has actually led to where we are today. We do hope that Lebanon can still avoid being part of this regional conflict, and that the government can expedite its activities in terms of controlling weapons and having exclusivity over war and peace decisions and holding and carrying arms across the country. Yet this conflict is expanding, no doubt, and nobody knows how long it will be for, but definitely Lebanon should not be part of it and is not capable of handling further conflicts and further devastation. We have people leaving their homes, we have people dying, lots of people injured today, and the economy is already very fragile with an economic crisis that we're trying to address. So Lebanon is not in a position to withstand any further conflicts.
Ghassan Hasbani from the Lebanese Forces Party. And now let's focus on what's happening inside Iran. People there are experiencing their third day of aerial attacks. The Iranian Red Crescent says more than 550 people have been killed since Saturday, though it hasn't disclosed who the victims are. It's not clear whether they're civilian casualties or members of the security forces. It's difficult to gather information from Iran at the best of times. The regime strictly limits who's allowed in to report. And now, intermittent internet blackouts there make it even harder to reach ordinary people. But our BBC Persian service has received some messages from those on the ground in Tehran. Here are some, voiced by our producers.
People feel anxious and elated all at once. With every explosion, some shout with joy from their windows. It was the same on Saturday night. So many people were out on the streets, dancing and celebrating. The celebrations began the very moment they heard the strikes.
People were incredibly happy. I think the timing of the announcement of Khamenei's death on state television was deliberate. They likely wanted to prevent people from pouring into the streets to protest. They announced it just before the call to prayer in the early hours of the morning.
When I speak to people in the streets, they say they're fine. Frightened of the missiles, of course, but happy somehow. Their main concern is that the US might make a deal and the authorities begin oppressing people all over again. Personally, I don't think the US and Israel will bring this to an end until the Islamic Republic is gone. I do think they expect people to take to the streets and protest, and I'm prepared to do so myself.
Earlier, I spoke to Gonche Habibiazad from our Persian service. I began by asking her about those messages and whether they were an accurate depiction of what most people were feeling inside Iran.
It's very difficult right now with the internet outage to know exactly how people think inside the country. But at the same time, we have seen on Iranian outlets that some people, some pro-establishment people, are mourning for the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on the streets as well. The mood is very grim for them. At the same time, the officials have said that the path of the Supreme Leader will continue. But at the same time, the voices that we just heard are from people who are opposed to the establishment. And they're very worried. At the moment, I'm hearing from people in Tehran, the capital, and in city nearby Karaj, that they have heard some heavy strikes. And they have said that the prices have increased in the capital. And they have been sent a text by the IRGC, which is Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, warning them not to go out to the streets and protest. I have seen that text. And people are really angry about the internet outage. It's very, very difficult to have a sense of what's going on. Streets are quiet from what they have told me. Bakeries and petrol stations are busy and some have fled the capital.
So, but you're obviously getting some bits and pieces of information. So I wonder if you can contrast that with the time when there was a massive communications blackout during the time of the protests and the crackdown against those protests in January. I mean, is it unusual that we're getting some more information, some more messages out?
Well, the methods that they have been sending information is one via the satellite internet Starlink, and that has also been a method that people have sent out information during the recent protests, which led to thousands getting killed as well. And it's not known what's going on inside the country. We can't have the full picture. BBC Persian journalists are not allowed to report from inside Iran, but we have to see what's going to happen and how we can monitor the situation with this issue.
BBC Persian's Gonche Habibizadeh. Still to come in this podcast, Iran attacks several Gulf states. We'll explore the ripple effects of that strategy. And we'll hear from Isaac Herzog, Israel's president, who says the future of the Middle East hinges on Iran losing the war. This is the Global News Podcast. We've been talking about how this conflict is expanding. Iran has again attacked several Gulf states. Explosions have been heard in capital cities across the region, including Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Kuwait City. Our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher spoke to us from Doha.
Here in Qatar, it's very quiet because people are mostly staying indoors. They have been told in alerts on their mobile telephones to do that, or advised to do that, because of the danger of incoming fire from the Iranians. We do hear regularly explosions in the air as the Qataris intercept missiles and drones, but there's been some damage and several injuries as a result of falling debris. So the streets are largely empty, not completely, but largely. We went to a market yesterday during Iftar, which is when the Muslims break the fast of Ramadan, and usually the market would be buzzing, and it was really dead. The shops were open, but there was almost no one there. So it's having a significant economic impact, or certainly will do if it continues for a period of time.
Barbara, can you remind us of the recent relationship that Iran has had with its neighbours in the Gulf? Have the attacks taken these nations by surprise?
Conservative Sunni monarchies that run the Arab Gulf states have had a history of tensions with Iran, which is a revolutionary Shia movement, run by a revolutionary Shia movement. But many of the states have found pragmatic ways to deal with that. And in recent years, the Saudis had taken steps to try to improve relations, I think especially after the October War started and they were pulling back from Israel. I think they were probably a little taken aback by just how aggressive it's been, because the Iranians have targeted not just the U.S. military bases that are scattered across the Gulf, but they've also hit civilian infrastructure. They're using drones that can get through air defense systems, and these drones have been targeting airports, which is a big problem for the Gulf because it's a hub for travel. The Gulf Cooperation Council on Sunday met and called the Iranian attacks treacherous and said that the Gulf countries reserved the right, they would take action or respond if they felt they needed to in self-defense. I mean, whether they will or not, I think, depends a lot on how long this goes on and how much it continues to escalate.
So what's Iran's thinking, do you think, in targeting these Gulf states? Isn't that a risky strategy, creating new military enemies?
According to analysts, they believe the strategy is that Iran is trying to create as much pressure as possible on the United States to pull back from the military strikes. And part of that would be creating a lot of pain in the Gulf through disruption of services and the economy and so on, because the Gulf prides itself on its stability and is needed for its economic ventures through oil exports and the like. I think that it's difficult for the Gulf states if they feel that they've got their back against a wall and they need to respond in some way. They may, for example, if they feel pushed, allow the Americans to use their bases for attacks on Iran. They did very publicly before this war started say that they would refuse to let the Americans attack Iran from the bases in their countries. So maybe they would change that. I know that I think someone in particular would be careful about attacking Iran since they don't want to be identified with an Israeli venture against their neighbor, especially since the beginning of the October War. So it's difficult. There are a lot of complexities involved. And the instinct of the Gulf states is to de-escalate because stability is important to them. But again, if the Iranians continue to escalate, they might decide they need other options.
Barbara Plett-Usher. Well, it goes without saying that this is a dangerous moment in time. The Israeli President Isaac Herzog has told the BBC the future of the Middle East hinges on Iran losing the war. He's been speaking with Anna Foster.
We are in a historic juncture where the future of the Middle East depends on the success of this operation, this war, because what emerges in front of our eyes are two coalitions that have been there and known to all of us, those who deal with the Middle East, for the last 20 years. But now they've come above board. One is the empire of evil from Tehran, spreading havoc, terror. And on the other hand, a coalition of nations who wants to move forward in the Middle East, of course supported by the United States of America, Israel and its neighbors in the Gulf, moving forward towards a different future in the regions. And the question is, it depends on, therefore, two things. Can one undermine the capability of Iran to develop nuclear arms and ballistic missiles and proxies will bring forward havoc and terror? And the other issue, of course, whether the regime will be changed.
We were told a year ago that Iran's nuclear project had been sent to oblivion during the 12-day war. This is the second preemptive war that Israel has launched on Iran. Was the nuclear program not destroyed? Why were we told it was?
This time it's also in conjunction with the United States of America because the information was clear and they had other sites. And we know that, and we share this information also with many of our partners.
If you're trying to achieve peace in the Middle East, there were negotiations going on, the same as there were last year when the 12-day war started. There were negotiations happening. There was a meeting in Geneva just days ago. Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, said that both sides left Geneva with an understanding that we would seal a deal the next time we meet. He talked about Mr. Trump ultimately ordering bombing of the negotiating table. Why start a war when those conversations were happening?
Okay, it's an absolute lie. I spoke myself to people who were in the room. And what they said, give you just one example. The Iranians said, we are willing, of course, to put a lid on our enrichment program and we won't move towards the bomb, but we need all sorts of requirements, would have brought them to 5 times the agreement that was done a few years back, way above 20% enrichment, which is a farce and a joke to anyone who understands in nuclear enrichment.
Israel's President Isaac Herzog. Throughout this podcast, we've been talking about how this conflict seems to be escalating. As the Americans and the Israelis continue to bombard Iran, Tehran is retaliating with strikes on targets across the Gulf. And Israel has struck Hezbollah targets in Lebanon after Hezbollah attacked Israel. It's a complex picture. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, shared her reflections on what's happening in the Middle East.
It is fraught with risk. Whenever a war is unleashed, it takes on a power and control of its own, and often it is out of control. And this is a war which has escalated from the very first minutes. The fact that in the first wave of strikes early in the morning in Tehran on Saturday eliminated the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the top 4 security chiefs, all in one swoop, as well as many others. We still don't have all the names. A message was sent to the Islamic Republic of Iran and those in charge. This is existential. And I keep remembering the interview I did with the Deputy Foreign Minister in Tehran earlier in February. And I said, what will you vow to retaliation? He said, yes, if it's existential, we will respond like never before. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, I don't want to go into the details. And we're seeing this. They are throwing everything at it, trying to increase the price for the United States, for Israel, and for countries across the Arab region who had been working around the clock to try to avert a war and now suddenly find themselves drawn into it, as Iran had warned.
When we talk about Iran, we talk about Iran sort of being alone in this conflict in some ways, with some proxies. But it's not alone diplomatically, is it? We have had China come out just in the past few hours with support of words for Iran. It also has close ties with Russia. I mean, how much do these ties with major powers matter at this moment for Tehran?
China and Russia are on the sidelines. Russia is worried about its own war in Ukraine. It's worried about the production of drones, that it is dependent on Iran so much to fight its own war. China, as you know, doesn't want to get involved in other people's wars. It's also worried about its oil that it gets from Iran after what happened in Venezuela. There are a lot of interests in this escalating conflict, and everyone is thinking of theirs. It is very unpredictable. It's very perilous. We don't know how it's going to end. And what is even more worrying, we really don't know how President Trump wants it to end.
Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. And that's all from us for now. If you want to get in touch, you can email us at globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. You can also find us on X at BBC World Service. Use the hashtag GlobalNewsPod. And don't forget our sister podcast, The Global Story, which goes in depth and beyond the headlines on one big story. This edition of the Global News Podcast was mixed by Nick Randall. The editor is Karen Martin. I'm Celia Hatton. Until next time, goodbye.